hum of the office HVAC wrapped around me as I shut the lactation room door, twisting the small lock until it clicked into place. It was 5:15 on a Wednesday, most of the team already packing up their desks to beat the evening rush on the highway outside Austin. My pumping kit sat open on the narrow counter, clean bottles lined up beside a portable cooler I hauled back and forth every day, ever since I'd returned part-time from maternity leave 2 months prior. 7 months old, my daughter Lila still relied entirely on breast milk, and Viridian Commercial Solutions was required by law to give me this quiet window each afternoon. For weeks, that small private room had felt like the only safe space in the whole building. I was mid-pump when my work phone buzzed once on the counter. A text from Lindsay, my closest coworker and friend in payroll, asking if I wanted to grab tacos after drop-off tomorrow morning. I typed back a quick yes, tucking the phone face down again, not thinking anything of it. The routine was familiar, manageable, the kind of steady rhythm I'd fought hard to rebuild after Lila was born. My husband Elias taught high school math, his schedule rigid and predictable, and my salary kept our household steady enough to cover the mortgage, daycare, and the stack of medical bills that had piled up after Lila's complicated birth. Losing this job wasn't something I could afford to imagine. 10 minutes later, a soft knock landed on the lactation room door. "Maren, you still in there?" Clayton Voss, my regional director, my direct boss. His voice was calm, polite, the same warm tone he used in all-hands meetings when he talked about supporting working parents. I paused, surprised. Clayton almost never stopped by this wing of the office unless he was pulling someone into his corner office for a formal check-in. I finished sealing the milk bowl, capped my and unlocked the. He leaned against the hallway, dress shirt still crisp despite the long workday, and nodded toward his office further down the. "Got a minute before you hit? Private conversation." My stomach gave a tiny uneasy flip. I'd never been called into his office after closing unless there was a problem with a project or a budget report I'd submitted. I glanced back at my cooler, then followed him down the carpeted hallway, my sneakers quiet against. His office door clicked shut behind us once I stepped, and he gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his wide oak. A framed photograph sat near his board. A small toddler girl with curly brown hair held in Clayton. I'd noticed it a handful of times before, but never asked. He folded his hands on the desk, leaning forwardly, his expression serious but not. "I'll cut straight to the point so I don't be late. I have an unusual offer for Maren. I'm willing to pay $50,000 cash for your breast milk ongoing, for as long as you're able." For a beat, I could not process the words. $50,000. The number hung thick in the air between us, heavy enough to make my ears ring. I blinked, certain. My voice thinner than I wanted it to be. "Did you just say $50,000? "That's correct," Clayton replied, no hesitation. "I know this is out of the ordinary. I'd keep the arrangement fully confidential. No one else at the company doubt. You'd have full control over how much you provide, within course." My first thought landed hard and sharp. He wanted my himself. Some weird bit fetish. Something he could away at home. Away from everyone who saw him as a rated director. He held up my neck, a mix of disgust and cold fear twisting in my chest. I sat back in the chair, my fingers curling tight around the wrist. "Clayton, that's not appropriate. That's deep." He frowned slightly, like my reaction confused him. "I understand it sounds on the surface. I'm asking you to take the weekend to consider it carefully. $50,000 would cover a lot for your family. Daycare costs, more you need." The mention of my bills stung. He knew our household income, knew how tight our budget ran. He held the power to approve my annual raise, to shift responsibilities, to make my life this company easy or miserable. The power imbalance sat heavy between us, able to ignore. This wasn't a casual request between equals. This was my boss offering me a large sum of money for something deeply personal, something tied to me. "I don't need to think of it," I told him, standing up from the chair. "My answer is no. I'm not comfortable with it at all." His jaw tightened a fraction, and his polite mask slid for barely a second before he smoothed it back into place. "Don't rush your call, Maren. Sleep on it. Send me an email or a text by Monday with your final answer." I didn't reply. I turned and walked out of his office as fast as I could without running, my cooler bumping against my head at the exit. My hands shook as I entered my car in the parking lot, the waiting behind me. By the time I pulled onto the highway, my mind was spiraling. Would he retaliate if I kept refusing? Could I report this to HR without risking my job? Who would believe me if my respected boss said I'd misunderstood a harmless conversation? When I pulled into our driveway, Elias was already home with Lila strapped to his chest in a carrier front porch. He smiled when he saw my car, then frowned on my face. I stepped out of the vehicle, shutting the car door softly, and all the tension I'd held inside since Clayton. Before I could say a word, my weighted in my bag. A new text message from Clayton appeared on the screen. Take all the time you need this weekend. This opportunity won't stay open forever. I sat rigid at my desk for the rest of the afternoon, the printer's low whir fading into background noise as I replayed Clayton's words over and over in my head. Our little girl. The phrase did not fit the narrative I had built, the one where he wanted my milk for some private, shameful craving. It pointed back to the framed toddler photograph I had spotted on his desk so many times before, the one I had written off as nothing more than family decor. I hesitated before opening any new browser tabs. My work laptop was monitored, every search and site visit logged by Viridian's IT team. Instead, I waited until I got home that evening, once Lila was down for her nap, and Elias had stepped outside to mow the lawn, and pulled up my personal laptop on the kitchen counter. I typed Clayton Voss, his wife Diana, and the name of our county into a public adoption record search portal, filtering results for the last 3 years. A court filing popped up within a minute. Clayton and Diana Voss had adopted a toddler girl 2 years prior. Another public health article linked Diana Voss to a rare autoimmune disorder that damaged her digestive tract, leaving their adopted daughter dependent on specialized raw human breast milk to manage severe food intolerances. Commercial formula made the toddler violently ill, and pasteurized donor milk from standard milk banks stripped away the specific immune compounds she needed. Insurance refused coverage for screened raw donor milk, and approved nonprofit milk banks could not supply enough consistent volume for the child long-term. My chest ached as I read through the details. Clayton had not approached me out of fetish. He had been desperate for his sick adopted daughter. That truth unraveled everything I thought I understood about the conflict. Sympathy tangled sharply with lingering anger in my chest. Desperation did not erase the power imbalance. It did not excuse using his authority as my supervisor to pressure me into a private cash transaction, dangling my promotion over my head when I refused. I closed the tab slowly, pushing the laptop away from me. The revenge I had vaguely imagined, a public takedown that ruined Clayton's reputation as a family man, no longer felt. Humiliating him would hurt Diana and their little girl alongside. But I also could not pretend his behavior was acceptable, or let the company brush the violation aside, simply because his cause was sympathy. When Elias came back in, wiping sweat from his head, I walked him through every record I had found. He leaned against the car, quiet for a long. That changes, he said finally. He wasn't, but he still abused his power over you. Those two facts can both be true, I nodded. That was the line I needed to hold on to. Motive did not. The next day at work, I moved through my tasks mechanically, watching Clayton from a careful. I noticed small things I had ignored. The way he took frequent quiet calls, leaving the office to step. The medical supply cooler he sometimes carried to his car at the end. The pieces fit together now. I also kept observing the quiet retaliation that had begun after my HR complaint. Small, deliberate shifts. He reassigned 2 long-term projects I managed to another coordinator without discussion. He stopped looping me into planning meetings I had attended for. The changes were subtle enough that anyone outside our team would write them off as standard work adjustments. But I found clearly, a slow erasure. I thought about reaching out to Diane directly, typing and deleting draft messages on a notes app dozens of times throughout the week. Every version risked sound accusatory, like I was trying to push her husband, rather than explain what had happened. I worried she would shut immediately, assume I was lying or looking for Lev Clayton. I also checked the nonprofit milk bank website that night, confirming what the public records had stated. Families in Diana's position were often forced into gray market arrangements because official channels failed them. Clayton had picked the easiest, fastest option to him, offering large cash to an employee. He had not stopped to consider how coercive that dynamic. By Friday, I knew I needed more documentation before I went back through my saved audio files, my written logs, the text messages from Clayton, and the employee handbook policy banning private financial agreements between supervisors. Every piece of evidence still held weight, even after learning the full offer. Lindsay found me alone in the break room that afternoon. Coffee. Her voice low, glancing toward the office windows to make sure no early. I heard your process got reassigned, she said quietly. I'm sorry. I didn't realize he would Her apology softened of my loneliness, but I understood she still would not risk a witness statement. We talked for only a minute before another worker walked in and ended. Our friendship would not return to what it had been. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table and mapped out paths. The first path: drop complaint entirely. Accept reduced workload. Keep my head down and wait for interest. The second path: proceed with a formal complaint, but frame it strictly around policy violation, workplace coercion, avoiding any public mention of daughter's medical needs. That way, I held Clayton accountable without dragging his sick conflict. Before I could decide, I found an old local news article archive. It covered a fundraiser Diana had hosted for families struggling to access specialist donor breast milk. Buried in the article was a passing from Diana herself, saying she would never ask friends or co-workers for milk donations, worried it breath hitched. Diana did not seem to approve of the exact chosen. I stared at my screen, a new possibility up in front of me. If Diana was unaware that Clayton had offered $50,000 to a subordinate, everything could shift. I closed the brow and leaned back in my chair, thinking carefully about how to reach her without starting a fire I could not control. The simple, clean resolution I had hoped for with AR was impossible now. Whatever move I made next would ripple outward, touching Diana, their daughter, Clayton standing at the rear. The ease to walk away. But I knew I could not. If I let this pass without pushback, Clayton might approach another pregnant or employee down the line. Someone who could money. I picked up my notes app again, drafting a short, neutral fact intended for Diana. No anger, no accusations, only the timeline of what Clayton had done. The faint click of the voice memo recorder was swallowed by the soft hum of Clayton's desk fan as I settled back in the chair across from him. I kept my hands folded loosely in my lap, careful not to shift my jacket and draw attention to the phone tucked inside the inner pocket. Every word I chose had to stay calm, measured, free of outburst that he could later frame as unprofessional aggression. From my perspective, this conversation should already be finished, I said. I emailed you my formal refusal this morning. The arrangement you proposed crosses clear professional boundaries. Clayton leaned forward, steepling his fingers over the printed email I'd sent. His easy corporate charm was gone, replaced by a sharp, unyielding edge I had never seen directed at me before. You're treating this like some kind of scandal, Maren. I'm trying to compensate you fairly for something your body produces naturally. $50,000 is more than enough to ease every financial strain your family is carrying right now. It doesn't matter how much money you offer, I replied. You are my supervisor. Any private deal between us creates an unacceptable conflict of interest. The employee handbook explicitly prohibits personal financial agreements between managers and direct reports. He blinked, as if he had not expected me to cite company policy back to him. For a split second, his composure wavered. That rule exists to stop under-the-table kickbacks for project assignments, not this. This is a private exchange of goods. Company policy does not draw that distinction, I answered evenly. And beyond the rules, this request invades my bodily autonomy. My breast milk is for my daughter. I am not comfortable selling it to anyone, especially my boss. Clayton exhaled slowly, leaning back in his leather chair and staring toward the window overlooking the office parking lot. I hoped you would be more reasonable. This opportunity will not remain open indefinitely. You should consider how your choices here might shape your trajectory at Viridian over the next. The threat hung plainly in there, even if he never spoke it outright. My fingers tightened slightly beneath the fabric of my trousers. I knew then that gentle pushback would never make him back down. He viewed his authority as enough to persuade me to. I understand the implication, I told him, but my answer remains null. I would like to conclude that. He gave a short nod, and I stood and walked out of his office without another word. Once I reached the quiet stairwell away from the main, I paused the recording, saved the file with a clear damp, and uploaded a password-protected copy to the cloud storage Elias and I shared at home. I did not store the audio anywhere on my work. By mid-morning, I called the free employment law hotline the attorney referral service had. The volunteer attorney walked me through workplace boundary violations, the risks of retaliation, and the proper procedure for filing an informal HR concern before moving to a formal. She stressed that documented audio recordings could serve as critical evidence, though laws vary. She also warned me that internal HR teams often prioritize limiting corporate liability over protecting individuals. That noon, I drafted an informal written concern for Toon. I kept the document actual, listing the initial offer, the pressure, and Clayton's indirect reference to my upcoming promotion review. I avoided emotional language, sticking strictly to dates and observable actions. Before sending it, I shared the draft with Elias, who read it twice, and confirmed it stayed within safe. When I sent the email to Teresa, I copied no other parties. Less than an hour later, her reply landed in my inbox, She requested a closed-door joint the next day, with Clayton present alongside. Sank. I had hoped to speak with HR privately first, to lay out my evidence without the accused supervisor sitting at the table. I texted Lindsay that evening to explain what Her reply came slower than usual, guarded. She said she worried being pulled into the conflict could hurt her own in payroll, a department that reported directly to the same executive leadership, and she did not offer to attend the meeting or provide it. Our quiets had frayed, and I understood her fear even as loneliness settled. That night marked my first night. After Ella fell asleep, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried quietly into a towel, overwhelmed all. I had never imagined fighting my employer to keep control over my own body. Elias sat beside the cool tile, wrapping an arm on my shoulders, and reminded me that choosing to defend my boundaries did not make me difficult. The following morning arrived too quickly. I tucked my phone back in my jacket pocket, ready to record again if the conversation took a hostile turn, and walked into the glass-walled room. Teresa sat at the head of the table with a printed note of her. Clayton arrived moments later, dressed sharply, carrying of his own. He met my gaze briefly, expression neutral, no hint of the pressure he had applied. Teresa opened the discussion calmly, stating that she was facilitating a conversation to resolve a workplace misunderstanding before it escalated further. The word misunderstanding landed like a stone. She had already framed the entire incident as miscommunication rather than violation. Clayton spoke first, describing his proposal as an unusual but well-intentioned arrangement. He emphasized that he had intended to harass me, that he refused. He did not mention the follow-up confrontation in the lactation room, nor his indirect motion. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out the full timeline, referencing my written documentation. I told Teresa about the second unsolicited conversation in the lactation room, and the text hinting at review. Teresa nodded along, scribbling notes, but never asked Clayton to respond directly. By the end of the meeting, Teresa suggested we all move forward with a verbal agreement to avoid one-on-one private discussions outside scheduled work check-ins. She said she would not open a formal investigation unless further incidents occurred. No disciplinary action, no written reprimand personnel file. The conference room stunned. My attempt to create safety through official channel had accomplished almost nothing. The company had chosen to smooth the conflict over, Clayton accountable. I looked back toward my desk. I realized I could no longer trust HR to protect me. Any further action would help planning. Later that same afternoon, I lingered by the copy machine to print quarterly expense reports when Clayton stepped out of his office and took a feet down the hallway. His voice was lowered, but not quiet enough to stay put. I froze mid-print, looking into his cell phone. The milk supply situation is getting tighter. We need consistent volume for our little girl. Time is running short. My breath caught in my throat. For months I had assumed his request stemmed from some twisted personal fixation. Now those words cracked a completely new possibility I had never considered. I hurried back to my desk before he noticed me, my mind racing. The whole story was not what I thought it was. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Lila had fallen asleep in her crib upstairs, the dim glow of the fridge light cutting through the quiet dark. Elias leaned against the counter, holding a mug of lukewarm tea. His brow creased as I walked him through every word Clayton had said in that closed office. I kept pausing, replaying the tone in his voice. The way he'd brought up our mortgage and daycare like he already knew those bills were my soft spot. Elias set his mug down gently, the ceramic tapping against the linoleum. That's not just awkward, Maren, that's a power play. He knows you can't afford to lose this position. I stared at my hands, still jittery from the afternoon conversation. Part of me wanted to call HR immediately, to fire off a formal complaint before the details blurred and people started asking for proof. Another part held me back, cold and cautious. Clayton was well liked across every department at Viridian. He'd led big successful projects, handed out end-of-year bonuses, volunteered at company family events. If this turned into a he-said-she-said fight, who would the leadership side with? The next morning, I texted Lindsay carefully, asking if we could meet before our shift started instead of grabbing tacos. We sat in the corner booth of a small diner close to the office, steam curling up from our coffee mug, the clink of silverware and low chatter around us, covering our quiet conversation. I didn't share every detail right away, only enough to explain that Clayton had made an extremely inappropriate private offer to Lindsay's eyes widened, and she glanced over her shoulder instinctively before leaning across the table. Are you serious? Clayton Voss, the guy who runs the Parent Resource Committee? She hesitated, picking at the edge of her neck. Look, I'm on your side. But HR here tends to circle the wagons around upper management. I've seen it before. A coworker filed a complaint 2 years, and she ended up reassigned to a dead-end role with no raise for 3 cycles. Her warning settled heavy in my chest. I'd hoped she would push me to speak up without hesitation, but her hesitation mirrored my own. By the time we finished breakfast, I'd made a quiet. Before I said anything official, I needed a paper. When I got home that evening, I pulled up the voice memo app on my work phone, the one I'd downloaded months ago and never touched, testing to make sure it recorded early. Foreshadowing B moved from pending to developing, and though I said nothing aloud to anyone. For the next 2 workdays, I avoided Clayton as much. I submitted reports through email instead of dropping them off in his office, scheduled my breaks around his typical hallway routes, and ducked back into the lactation room quickly if I heard his voice nearby. I thought if I kept my distance, he might drop the thing, write the offer off as a bad step. That hope died Thursday. I was packing up my pumping supplies in the lactation room when the learned, and Clayton stepped inside with. My shoulders locked up instantly. The small room felt far too cramped with both of us. The quiet hum of the pump equipment, the only sound. You've had a couple days to think, he said. His voice lower than usual. No warm, polite this time. I haven't gotten a message. I already told you my is no, I replied, keeping my own steady, shoving the cooler close. This conversation. He did his weight, blocking the doorway just enough that I couldn't walk past without brushing. Don't make a permanent decision-based comfort. 50,000 changes a lot for a young family. Think about what that money could do for its future, for your retirement fund. You don't have to answer second. But don't pretend this isn't an opportunity most. I fought the urge back, to argue that my body wasn't a commodity to be bought for cash by my boss. Instead, I stepped sideways, reaching around him to twist the lock open again. I'm leaving. He stepped aside at last, letting me pass, but his gaze stayed fixed on my back as I walked into the hallway. That evening, after I got home, I dug out the employee handbook saved on the shared drive, scrolling through policy after policy until I found the clause I suggested. Viridian banned all private financial agreements between supervisors and its. Foreshadowing C shifted to developing. That night, I opened a new document on a laptop, separate from anything linked to my work account, and typed out every interaction with Clayton from the first offer to that action. I listed dates, approximate times, exact as I could recall, and witnesses who might have seen Clayton linger in the room. I saved it to a password-protected folder and sent a copy to Elias's personal email. Late Friday morning, a new text popped up on my Clayton. He didn't reference the offer directly, but the underlying pressure was impossible to miss. He wrote that the quarterly promotion review draft was almost finished, and he was still deciding which team members would be flagged for advanced cycle. The message didn't need to spell out the threat. Understood perfectly. Refuse his offer, and my professional I stared at the screen for a long moment, wrote tight. This was no longer a one-time weird request I could brush off. Clayton was actively leveraging his authority to push me into compliance. The quiet balance I'd tried to maintain for the past few days was shattered completely. I could no longer pretend this would fade away if I stayed. I showed the Elias that evening, and he pulled up the number for a free employment law line he'd found online, pushing the phone toward me. Before I could dial it, another notification pinged on my screen. A calendar invite appeared in my inbox, scheduled for Monday afternoon. One-on-one check-in. Weekend stretched ahead of me, full of restless, sleepless nights and looping worst-case scenarios. By Sunday night, I had my written refusal drafted and ready to first thing Monday morning. Sending it would escalate everything, but staying far more dangerous. It was gray and rainy. I dropped Lila off at daycare, drove to the office, and sent the full email declining his offer, saying no one else yet. Minute after I hit send, my phone buzzed. Clay replied almost instantly, asking to meet in his calendar check-in. I hesitated, and headed down the hall. When I pushed open his door, he sat back in his chair, tapping a printed email on his desk. Let's know why your turn, he said. I sat across from him, keeping my expression neutral, and hit record on the voice memo app tucked inside my jacket pocket. The weekend unfolded slowly, stretched thin between Lila's feeding schedule and the heavy weight of the choice sitting in front of me. I kept going back to that news quote from Diana, replaying it in my mind, trying to separate fact from hope. She had said she would never pressure coworkers for donor milk, But that did not guarantee she would believe a stranger emailing her about her husband. One wrong word, and I could turn her into an enemy instead of an ally. Elias sat with me Saturday afternoon at the kitchen table, scrolling through the same public records I had pulled up 2 days earlier. He pointed out that the fundraiser Diana ran focused on regulated milk bank advocacy, not private cash trades. Her whole public stance lines up against what Clayton did, he said, but that does not mean she knows any of this happened. I deleted 3 full drafts of the note before landing on language that stayed strictly factual. No frustration, no accusations, no mention of how unsettled I had felt. I laid out the date of the original offer, the $50,000 figure, the follow-up pressure in the lactation room, and the indirect threat tied to my promotion review. I included that I had filed an informal HR concern and that work assignments were being pulled away from me afterward. I left out the audio recordings for now, only noting I maintained dated documentation of every interaction. I did not send it yet. Monday morning at the office, the quiet retaliation continued. A calendar invite appeared for a project kickoff meeting I used to lead, and my name was not listed on the attendee sheet. When I messaged the coordinator assigned to my old projects to ask for context, she replied that Clayton had told her I was shifting to more administrative support work for the quarter. The redefinition of my role was happening incrementally, with no formal written notice, making it hard to flag as retaliation in any official complaint. I ran into Teresa from HR by the copy room mid-morning, and I asked if there had been any follow-up from our joint meeting. She smiled politely and said the matter was closed unless new incidents occurred. There would be no investigation, no note in Clayton's file, no check-ins to monitor if my workload was being adjusted unfairly. Her response confirmed what Lindsay had warned me weeks before. The company would protect its senior leadership. By Tuesday evening, I made the call to consult a private employment attorney for an initial consultation. The free hotline had given me basic guidance, but I needed someone who could walk me through how to submit a formal complaint properly, how to store my audio evidence legally under Texas recording laws, and what protections I had if retaliation worsened. The consultation carried one we would have to trim from our household, but I decided it was worth the same. The attorney reviewed my timeline and my evidence over a video call Wednesday night. She confirmed that even with Clayton's sympathetic family circumstances, offering large private compensation to a direct port, and tying career growth to acceptance of the offer violated company policy and created a hostile work environment. She warned me that contacting Diana if Diana defended, the message could be used against me, framed as harassment. That warning gave. I closed my laptop after the call and sat on the couch watching Lila kick her legs in her. I thought about what it meant to hold someone accountable without inflicting unnecessary. I was not trying to take Clayton's daughter's medical options away. I only wanted to stop him from leveraging power over other nursing. Thursday, I decided to hold off on sending the note to Diana for a few. Instead, I spent the afternoon organizing my full ends packet. I created a password-protected folder, logs, screenshots of text messages, saved email threads, audio recordings exported and backed up across 3 separate secure cloud accounts, a copy of the employee policy, and the public records about Diana's illness and their adopted child. I printed a physical copy of every document and locked it in a small fireproof box we kept in the top of our. At work Friday afternoon, Lindsay found me We looked tense, glancing toward the hallway before. I heard from someone in operations that Clayton is pushing to move you fully off client-face month. It would be a pay freeze, same title, less ability. My stomach dropped. The slow retaliation was building toward a tangible penalty. I thanked her for telling me, and she nodded, stepping away quickly before anyone noticed our conversation lasted too long. There was no one left inside Viridian. That night, I revisited the draft note to Diane. I read it aloud to Elias, and we trimmed every line that carried emotional weight. The final version was concise, neutral, and focused entirely on the sequence of events. I added a line saying I was reaching out only because public material suggested she disagreed with private work milk arrangements, and that I had no intention of dragging their daughter's medical situation into any formal complaint. I still hesitated. Over the weekend, I dug deeper in milk bank records and found the final piece of context I had been missing. The regional nonprofit milk bank had formally denied Clayton's application for expanded raw donor supply 3 months earlier. Their policy required all donors to go through rigorous health screening, formal oversight, and private cash transactions bypassed safety protocols. That denial was what had pushed Clayton to look for a solution at his own team. That detailed picture. Clayton had exhausted official channels, panicked over his daughter's health, and chosen the easiest pressure. A nursing employee worried about her family's finance security. The motive was rooted for his child, but the choice to use his managerial power remained. I sat with that on Sunday evening, my laptop open message. I understood him now, never had at the start, but understanding did not make it appear. I could not pretend that power imbalance was irrelevant, just Bill. I moved my cursor over the send button, my finger trackpad. If I sent that, there was no going back. The conflict would spill outside the office walls into Clayton's marriage and home life. The fight would no longer stay contained within Viridian's conference rooms. I took a slow breath and the message vanished into the outbox, and I sat back, hammering. There was no way to predict Diana would respond. She might call Clayton immediately, fear contacting her. She might reach out to me privately to hear the full story. She might delete the thing at all. The following morning, before I even had my first cup of coffee, a reply appeared in my personal inbox. It was short, signed Diana Voss, and it asked if I would meet her for coffee at a cafe outside town, somewhere far away from the office. No action, no anger, only a request face. I stared at the screen, realizing the middle of the stood irrevocably. The conflict was no longer only between me and my boss. Now his wife was stepping into the middle of it, and I had no idea which side she would take. The cafe sat tucked between a neighborhood bookstore and a flower shop, 20 minutes outside Austin, far enough that I was unlikely to run into anyone from Viridian. I arrived 10 minutes early with my bag slung over one shoulder, the fireproof box's digital backup secure on my personal cloud, no physical evidence brought with me. I had decided before leaving the house not to show Diana the audio recordings right away. I wanted her to hear the full timeline first, without hard evidence overriding her ability to process what her husband had done. Diana walked through the front door shortly after I ordered my coffee. She was thinner than the photographs online suggested, her movements careful, the faint weariness of chronic illness etched around her eyes. She spotted me in the back booth and slid into the seat across, setting her purse down gently beside her. For a long beat, neither of us spoke, only the soft clink of mugs and quiet conversation from nearby tables filling the space. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," I said first, keeping my tone calm and neutral, the same restraint I had used in my email. "I didn't want to contact you directly, but public records and news articles made it clear you and Clayton disagree on how to source donor milk." She nodded slowly, wrapping both hands around her warm tea mug. "I read your email 3 times last night before I said anything to Clayton. I didn't confront him right away because I needed to hear your side without his explanation shaping what I believe." Her voice was steady, but I caught the tremor underneath. "I had no idea he approached one of his employees with a cash offer. I told him months ago that if the milk bank turned us down, we would look for regulated peer support groups, not private deals with people who work for him." The confirmation settled in my chest. Clayton had acted entirely without his wife's approval. Diana had drawn the exact boundary I had hoped she would. I walked her through every event in order. The closed office $50,000 offer, the unsolicited conversation inside the lactation room, the indirect threat tied to my promotion review, the informal HR meeting where Clayton omitted key details, and the ongoing shift of my job responsibilities. I did not exaggerate, did not add emotional flourish, and I carefully avoided sharing the specifics of our daughter's medical struggle. That privacy still belonged to me. When I finished, Diana sat quiet for several minutes, staring down into her. "He's terrified of watching our little girl get sick," she said eventually. That fear clouded his judgment completely, but that does not excuse pressuring someone who reports to him. He knew the power imbalance. He chose to. She told me she planned to confront Clayton that evening. Her primary concern was protecting their daughter's access to safe milk, but she was unwilling to let her husband coerce an employee. She also admitted she worried Clayton would dig in his heels and defend his choices rather than acknowledge he had crossed. We talked through what would happen. Diana agreed she would be willing to serve as a witness if I filed a formal HR complaint, confirming that Clayton acted without consent and against her explicit. She also promised to push Clayton to stop the quiet retaliation against her, though she admitted she could not guarantee. Before we parted ways, Diana leaned forward across. "I'm sorry this to you. You should never have been put in." The apology meant more than expected. It softened months of tension that had settled tight in my. When I got home, I told Elias everything. We spent the evening refining my formal packet, incorporating Diana's potential witness statement into the document outline. My attorney reviewed the draft weekend, flagging sections to keep focused strictly on policy violations and workplace coercion. avoiding any unnecessary personal attack. Monday morning, the atmosphere at Viridian different. Clayton did not acknowledge the hallway. No lingering glances, no quiet attempts to corner me for the first time since the original offer, he kept. I suspected Diana had already spoken with him. Midweek, though, I realized Clayton was prepared. Lindsay pulled me aside in the break room to warn me that Clayton had mentioned to another manager that he planned to frame the entire incident as a casual, rejected personal proposal that I had blown. He intended to argue there was no threat, no retaliation, only a misunderstanding. That evening, Diana texted me from a private number we had exchanged. Her confrontation with Clayton had. Clayton refused to admit he had pressured me, insisting the offer had been fair. He argued that my refusal was personal choice, and that shifting my workload was standard team restructuring, not retaliation. He also threatened that if I submitted a full complaint, he would claim I had breached confidentiality by reaching out to his wife and dragging his family into this. That threat became Clayton's word. If I moved forward officially, he planned to paint me as someone who invaded his family's privacy. I sat on the couch and read the text message again. Options. If I backed down now, the retaliation would likely continue, and another nursing employee could face the same pressure later. Filed the complaint, Clayton would fight back hard, trying to. After talking it through with Elias and my attorney, I uploaded the complete organized evidence folder to the secure HR portal the afternoon. I did written logs, screenshots, audio recordings, the employee handbook policy citation, and a signed witness statement to Anna Voss. I submitted the full formal workplace policy complaint. Once I hit submit, I locked my laptop in the desk, taking it back. The official internal The next morning, Teresa from HR sent a calendar invite for a formal investigative interview same week. Both Clayton and I would give statements, and HR would reach out to listed witnesses, Diana. As I stared at the invite on my screen, I understood that the final con drawing near. Every choice, every piece of evidence, every conversation stretching back to that Wednesday in Clayton's office, was about to be laid out for the company's investigative team. The week leading up to the investigative interview dragged slowly. Work settled into a strange, suspended silence. Clayton never crossed my path, never sent follow-up messages, never asked for updates on any task. The usual small office chatter around our team died away. Word of the open investigation had spread quietly through the building, and most coworkers avoided drawing close to either of us. I spent every night reviewing my evidence packet with Elias and my attorney. We practiced how to answer questions calmly, how to avoid emotional outbursts that Clayton's legal representative could twist into hostility. My attorney reminded me the investigation's goal was to assess policy violations, not decide who was morally good or bad. Clayton's love for his daughter would not excuse violating the company ban on private supervisor-subordinate financial deals, nor would it erase the coercive power dynamic. Diana texted me once midweek to confirm she was ready to speak with HR when contacted. She also told me Clayton had hired outside counsel to advise him through the internal process. That detail sharpened my focus. He was not going to concede easily. The day of the interview arrived gray and rainy. I brought a printed copy of my full evidence binder and arrived 10 minutes early to the closed HR conference room. Teresa Boone sat alongside an external third-party investigator the company had brought in to avoid bias. A neutral woman with a notebook and recording device sat on the table. Clayton entered 5 minutes later, dressed in a tailored suit, carrying his own folder. He sat across the table from me, his expression composed, no flicker of recognition or remorse. The investigator opened by explaining the process. Each of us would give a sworn statement. Witnesses would be interviewed separately, and the team would issue a final written finding. Clayton spoke first. He laid out his version of events carefully. He described the $50,000 offer as a compassionate solution for his daughter's medical needs, framed the conversation as voluntary, and insisted he never intended to pressure. He denied making any implied threat about my promotion or job duties. He claimed the reassignment of my projects was purely operational restructuring. At the end of his sentence, he repeated his complaint that I had contacted Diana without permission, arguing I had invaded his family's privacy to retaliate. When it was mine, I walked the investigator through the full ton. I referenced the audio recordings, the written logs, the text messages, and the employee handbook policy. I explained how a direct supervisor offering a large cash sum to a subordinate could not be treated as a neutral, voluntary. I acknowledged I now understood his motive stemmed from fear for his adopter. but emphasized that desperation did not justify leveraging professional authority. The investigator paused and asked directly whether I believed Clayton had intended her. I answered plainly that I could not speak to his personal, but his actions violated clear company policy and created a hostile working environment. After our statements, the investigator scheduled separate interviews for Lindsay. Lindsay hesitated before saying, but once she understood she would only be asked factual questions about workload changes and office gossip, she consented. Diana spoke with the investigator, confirming she had never approved Clayton's proposal and had explicitly warned him against approaching coworkers for private milk. For 3 long days after the witness interview wrapped up, I waited with no updates. I tried to keep my routine normal. Daycare drop-offs, pumping on schedule, finishing my adjusted workload, cooking dinner with Elias, reading to Lila. But my mind kept circling every possible outcome. Viridian could side with Clay entirely, clear him of wrongdoing, and leave me exposed to worse retaliation. They could issue a mock reprimand. They could terminate employment. None of the result. The closing call from Teresa Boone came on a phone. She asked me to meet alone in the HR office. My hands shook slightly as I went. Inside the conference room, the external investigator sat. They slid the printed final report across me. The findings confirmed Clayton Voss had violated 2 official policies: the ban on private financial transactions between supervisors' reports, and the workplace conduct rule prohibiting quid pro quo pressure to job advancement. The report noted the power imbalance between regional director and coordinator, and that the reassignment of my projects qualified as retaliatory action after my initial. But the disciplinary action. Clayton received a 10-day suspension without pay, mandatory multi-day work boundary training, and a formal written reprimand permanently added to his personnel file. The company ordered him to restore my original project responsibilities immediately and cease any adjustments to my role without formal HR approval. The report also included a note that Viridian would implement new training for all managers about acceptable donor milk arrangements and workplace, bodily autonomy boundaries for nursing parents, to explain the decision. The investigation acknowledged Clayton's family medical crisis mitigating context, which prevented termination. However, the company determined his behavior not go unpunished, given the clear policy violation. I sat back in my chair and the outcome. It was not the dramatic, complete takedown I had fleetingly imagined at the very beginning, before I learned about his daughter. It was accountability, measured and restrained. He faced consequences, but he kept his job, his career. When I left HR that afternoon, and in the hallway, he was packing his off items for the suspension. Our eyes met briefly. There was no apology, no argument, only a quiet, heavy look before he looked away and killers. I walked out of the building, climbed into my car, and sat quiet for a minute in the parking lot. The months of stress, nights reviewing evidence, anxious conversations with Elias, moral conflict for right versus revenge, to a close. The fight was over. The weekend after the ruling felt like exhaling a breath I had been holding for months. Lila babbled and rolled across the living room floor, and for the first time since Clayton made that offer, I did not find myself replaying office conversations in the back of my mind while I watched her. Elias and I ordered takeout, left the work laptop closed on the home office desk, and turned off all notifications linked to my work email. On Monday morning, I returned to Viridian knowing my original projects would be handed back to me. The HR team sent a company-wide memo that did not name Clayton or detail the specifics of the investigation. It only announced updated manager training regarding working parents, bodily autonomy, and conflicts of interest between supervisors and staff. No mention of suspensions, no public discipline. Most employees would never know the full story behind the new policy changes. Lindsay found me by the break room coffee pot before 9. She hesitated, then gave me a small, tired smile. I'm glad it's settled. I was worried this would blow up for everyone. There was still a faint distance between us, the kind left when someone chooses caution over solidarity during a crisis. I smiled back, letting the old friendship shift into something quiet. No hard feelings, just a new boundary we both understood. By mid-morning, the project files I had lost weeks before appeared in my shared drive inbox. A neutral admin had reassigned them, no note from Clayton. He was serving his 10-day unpaid suspension and would not return to the office until the following week. HR scheduled a permanent indirect reporting workaround. All my deliverables would route through a different senior manager while Clayton remained with the company. We would not need one-on-one closed-door meetings, no private check-ins behind a shut office. That afternoon, I stopped into the lactation room again. The small, quiet space where Clayton had cornered me felt different. The fear that had clung to these walls faded. I locked the door, set up my pump, and let the familiar routine settle over. This room was mine, not a place where I could be pressured or confronted. A few days later, I received a short message from Diana on the private number we had used to communicate. She wrote that she and Clayton were still working through the damage his choice had caused their marriage. They had connected with a properly screened, regulated donor collective approved by the bank, and their daughter's health was stable. She thanked me for handling the conflict without dragging their child into public. I sent back a brief, polite reply, wishing her family peace. We never messaged again. The weeks rolled forward. My workload sized. My next annual review arrived with the raise I had been on track for before everything began. I continued pumping Lila, slowly building a freezer stash until she was ready to transition more fully to. The daily rhythm felt. When Clayton returned to the office, we crossed paths only a handful of times in hallways or company. He never spoke to me, never my eye. He completed his mandatory training, kept his interactions with his team strictly professional, and never attempted any private financial conversations. The written reprimand sat permanently in his profile, a quiet record that would follow him if another similar complaint. I sat at my desk one evening, packing to head home, and thought back to that first afternoon in his office. $50,000 my breast milk. At the very start, I had pictured a straightforward expose boss, watch him lose everything, walk away. The reality had been messier. I learned his choice came from desperate love for a sick child. I learned accountability did not require destroying a person completely. I learned protecting my boundaries did not have to mean punishing everyone connected. I took my laptop, grabbed my cooler, and slung my batter. The office hummed around me, normal again. I did not win a dramatic public takedown, but I won something more important. I reclaimed control over my body, my career, and my peace of mind. I forced the company to fix flawed policies that could hurt other nursing parents later. I set a line no supervisor would dare again. Outside, the evening sun filtered on. Unlocked my car, set the cooler carefully in the passenger seat, and pulled out onto the highway, headlessly. The whole ordeal was behind me now. Sometimes justice is quiet. Sometimes revenge is choosing not to become to fight cruelty. Sometimes victory is simply walking away whole.